If you're brave enough to step into the darkest corners of America's prison system, hit that subscribe button. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it gets. And trust me, you don't want to walk these halls alone. The story begins on a fog-drenched morning in Crescent City, California. A cold silence hung over the highway leading to Pelican Bay State Prison as emergency sirens cut through the mist. A prison transport van sat abandoned on the side of the road, its back doors swinging open, one tire still spinning. The guards who were supposed to be inside had vanished. No signs of struggle, no footprints, no noise except the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Detective Aaron Miles arrived at the scene just after sunrise. A former state trooper with a reputation for reading crime scenes like open books, he stood staring at the abandoned van, uneasy. This wasn't common. Not here. This wasn't some minimum security escape attempt. This was Pelican Bay, home to California's most violent offenders, including the infamous D Block, a place even correctional officers feared. Inside the van, a single file lay on the floor. Inmate number 74291, Marcus Spine Corcoran, an enforcer for a prison gang known for orchestrating violence from inside isolation cells. Corcoran was scheduled for transfer to D-Block Secure Housing Unit, the area reserved for inmates too dangerous for the general population. But now he was gone. Miles lifted the file, noticing something strange. A page had been ripped out. A handwritten note remained in its place. "You're looking in the wrong place. Check where the light never reaches." That was the first sign that this disappearance wasn't just a simple escape. Someone had planned this. Someone who knew the system. Someone who knew Pelican Bay. Back inside the prison, Warden Elena Ramirez, a stern woman with 20 years of experience, led Miles to the concrete labyrinth of the facility. The air grew colder as they approached D-Block. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, as the walls absorbed every sound. Correctional officers stood rigid, their eyes scanning every corner, hands hovering near their holsters. "This is where Corcoran was headed," Ramirez said. "No inmate gets out of these cells without signing half a dozen documents, and even then only with a full escort." Yet somehow, Corcoran had vanished before even reaching the building. As they stepped inside D-Block, Miles felt the temperature drop. Metal doors lined the corridor, each one thick enough to stop a bullet. A single window high on the wall cast a dim blue-gray light across the floor. Inmates watched through slits in their cell doors, silent, waiting, observing. Even the sound of their breaths seemed to disappear here. Miles studied Corcoran's cell, untouched since his last lockdown. Everything was perfectly in place except one thing. On the concrete wall, carved with something sharp, was a message. "D-Block has two masters." Ramirez stiffened. "We do not tolerate gang messages here," she snapped. But her voice betrayed something else, fear. Before Miles could respond, a correctional officer ran toward them, out of breath. "Warden, you need to see this. It's urgent." They followed him to the far end of the block, where two officers stood staring at a maintenance hatch. The metal door was half open, bolts loosened from the inside, and smeared across the edge was a streak of dried blood. Miles crouched, examining the mark. "This isn't Corcoran's," he murmured. "It's too fresh." Ramirez swallowed hard. "Then whose is it?" The officer hesitated, then lifted a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was an ID badge, cold scratched, smeared in red. "Officer Daniel Holt. Missing since last night." Miles stood slowly, a chill crawling up his spine. 2 disappearances in 24 hours. 1 inmate, 1 guard, both tied to D-Block. And someone inside the prison knew more than they were saying. But as Miles reached for the maintenance hatch, ready to open it, another officer yelled from down the hall. "Detective! Warden! You need to come to the surveillance room now." They rushed to the control room. The screens flickered with static before resolving into a clear image, a dim hallway somewhere beneath the prison. A man with a hood covering his face moved silently through the shadows, dragging something behind him. As the figure turned toward the camera, Miles felt the air leave his lungs. He wasn't dragging something. He was dragging someone. The feed cut to black. And in the brief silence that followed, Miles whispered, "There's a whole part of this prison we've never seen." Detective Aaron Miles rewound the footage again, staring at the shadowed figure moving calmly through the hidden corridor beneath Pelican Bay. The image was grainy, but the movements were deliberate, confident. Whoever this was knew the prison's underground layout better than the staff themselves. Warden Ramirez stood beside him, arms stiff at her sides, jaw locked. "That hallway doesn't exist on any blueprint we have," she said quietly. "At least, not anymore." "What do you mean, not anymore?" Miles asked. She hesitated. Pelican Bay was built in phases over decades. Some older sections were sealed off. Too dangerous, unstable, or unnecessary. But I didn't think anyone could access them. Miles replayed the final few frames. Officer Holt's boot dragged lifelessly across the floor before the feed cut out. "We need to find that corridor," he said. Ramirez looked at him with shadow in her eyes. "Detective! If someone opened those tunnels again, then this isn't just about Corcoran. Something else is happening down there." They assembled a small team of officers and descended through the bowels of D Block. The maintenance hatch where they found Holt's ID led into a narrow service tunnel. The deeper they walked, the more oppressive the air became. Pipes rattled overhead. Cold water dripped down the walls. The only light came from their flashlights, cutting narrow beams through the darkness. Miles noticed faint markings on walls, numbers, arrows, scratch marks. They weren't recent. Someone had been navigating these tunnels long before the disappearances began. The tunnels widened into an old corridor lined with rusted cell doors, relics of a time when Pelican Bay segregation practices were far harsher. Some doors hung crooked. Others were fused shut with rust. Dust floated in the air like drifting ash. Why wasn't this demolished? Miles asked. Ramirez kept her light focused ahead. "Seismic risks. We were told it was safer to seal it and forget it existed." Miles crouched, brushing dust off the floor. Footprints. Fresh. Led deeper into the corridor. One set was heavy, spaced evenly. The other dragged. "Holt." They followed the trail until they reached a door with a faded warning sign. "Authorized staff only. Restricted access." It had been forced open recently. The metal bent inward like someone had pried it with industrial tools. Inside, the room was vast, a forgotten isolation wing. Rows of empty cells stretched into darkness. Shackles lay scattered across the floor. Old paperwork littered the desks, brittle with age. The smell of rust and damp concrete hung heavy. "This place was shut down 30 years ago," Ramirez whispered. "No inmate should be anywhere near this." Miles swept his flashlight along the walls. Deep scratches climbed from the floor to the ceiling. Letters. Words. "Please. Let me out. Please." "He's still here." Before they could process it, a faint noise echoed from the far end of the wing. A rhythmic metallic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Miles motioned for the officers to stay behind him. They moved slowly through the corridor, guns drawn, breaths tight. The tapping grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. They turned the corner and froze. Officer Holt was tied to a metal chair, hands bound, head hanging forward. He was alive, but barely. Blood streaked his uniform, and a crude message was carved into the back of the chair. "Follow him and you'll join him." Ramirez rushed forward, but Miles held her back. "Wait. This could be a trap." Then Holt stirred. A faint, broken whisper escaped his lips. "Not Corcoran." Miles knelt beside him. "What do you mean?" "Who took you?" Holt's trembling hand lifted slightly, pointing toward the shadows beyond the row of cells. "He's been here the whole time." Miles felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "Who?" Holt swallowed painfully, forcing the words out. "The other one, the one they never transferred. He runs D Block from down here. He never left." Before Miles could question him further, one of the officers shouted from behind, "Detective, you need to see this." They rushed over to the adjacent wall. Fresh spray paint glistened under their flashlights. A symbol, a mark used only by one of the most violent, long-disbanded prison factions in California, a group known for operating in absolute secrecy. Beneath the symbol, a message. Welcome back to his kingdom. Ramirez's face drained of color. This can't be possible. He died years ago. Miles stared at the message, heart pounding. Then who's walking these halls now? Before anyone could answer, the lights above flickered violently, plunging them into darkness. A door slammed somewhere deeper in the wing, and a low, gravelly voice echoed through the tunnel. You should have stayed out of D Block. The darkness inside the abandoned isolation wing swallowed every beam of the officers' flashlights. Detective Aaron Miles stood still, heart pounding, ears straining to locate the direction of the voice. It was deep, familiar somehow, and carried a calmness that made the hairs on his arms stand straight. Warden Ramirez whispered, "He's not supposed to exist. This is impossible." Miles kept his flashlight steady. "Who is he? Who's down here with us?" Before she could answer, Holt let out a sharp gasp. His eyes snapped open wide with terror. "He never died," Holt croaked. "They covered it up. He's been here the whole time, running everything." Miles leaned closer. "Tell me his name." Holt looked at him, voice cracking. "Richard Crane." Ramirez staggered backward. "No, that's not possible. Crane was declared dead after the riot in '98. He killed 3 inmates, nearly started a statewide war. When the smoke cleared, they said his body was found. They lied. Miles finished. A loud clang shot through the wing, like someone smashing metal against metal. The officers raised their weapons. Miles motioned down the hall and began moving, each step deliberate. The tapping started again, this time closer, more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. They followed the sound into a wider chamber where the ceiling arched overhead, and the old plumbing snaked across the walls like exposed veins. Their light swept across the room and then froze. Another chair sat in the center of the chamber. Another file folder rested on the seat. Miles approached cautiously, opening the folder. Inside were old disciplinary reports, inmate logs, and photos, grainy images of Crane from decades earlier. One image showed him staring directly at the camera, expression cold, jaw clenched. His eyes were the kind you didn't forget. Pinned to the final page was a fresh photograph. It showed Crane standing in the very room they were in, taken less than 24 hours ago. Ramirez stepped back. How is he down here? How did he survive? Miles flipped the page. On the back, a message scratched in jagged letters read, "You forgot the ones you buried." A sudden crash to their right made everyone jump. A door slammed open, and a figure burst out of the shadows. Miles raised his gun. But it wasn't Crane. It was Corcoran. Marcus' spine. Corcoran stumbled forward, hands raised, face bruised and swollen. "Don't shoot. Please don't shoot." 2 officers pinned him to the ground instantly, but Miles crouched in front of him. "Corcoran, where's Crane?" Corcoran shook violently. "You don't understand. I wasn't escaping. I was trying to get away from him. He's been using us for years. Running D Block from down here. Holt tried to warn Ramirez months ago, but nobody listened." Miles felt an icy weight settle in his chest. "Why reveal yourself now?" Corcoran swallowed hard. "Because he wants you down here. All of you. He's cleaning house." The overhead lights flickered again. A door creaked behind them. Miles spun, gun raised. A silhouette stood at the far end of the room. Broad shoulders, shaved head, calm posture. Slow, steady breathing echoed through the silence. Richard Crane stepped into the light. He looked older, but not frail. His presence filled the room with the kind of authority forged only through decades of surviving violence. His eyes swept across the group with unsettling calm. "You people sealed me under this prison like I was a secret," Crane said, voice steady. "Forgotten wings, forgotten men. You pretended the darkness wasn't here, but it always was." Ramirez's voice shook. "You killed 3 inmates. You tried to start a war. We had no choice." Crane tilted his head. "You had choices. You just didn't want to face the consequences." Miles stepped forward. "Let them go. This ends now." Crane smiled faintly. "Detective, you think you've uncovered the truth? You've barely scratched the surface." He raised something in his hand. A remote. Before anyone could react, he pressed it. A deafening rattle surged through the wing, as the old doors along the corridor unlatched. The officers spun around. Metal groaned. Locks disengaged. One by one, doors creaked open in the darkness. Corcoran screamed, "He's releasing them!" Miles raised his gun at Crane, but Crane stepped backward into the shadows. "You wanted the heart of D Block," Crane said softly. "Now you'll see how it beats." Then he vanished. Absolute chaos erupted as inmates, forgotten, unregistered, long hidden, emerged from the dark cells. Some stumbled weakly, blinking against the light. Others charged forward with feral desperation. "Fall back!" Miles shouted. "Move now!" They dragged Holt and Corcoran with them, pushing toward the maintenance tunnel. Officers formed a barrier, firing warning shots, using shields to push the inmates back. Screams echoed off the walls. Chains rattled. The old wing shook under the weight of chaos. As they reached the exit hatch, Miles looked back. Crane stood in the center of the chamber again, silent and calm, watching the collapse unfold around him. Their eyes met through the dust and flashing lights. Crane raised 2 fingers to his temple in a mock salute. "This isn't over," he mouthed. Miles slammed the hatch shut just as hands began pounding on the other side. Outside, alarms blared. Emergency lights flooded the upper levels. Guards swarmed the block. The prison roared with panic. Ramirez stared at Miles, breathless. "What is happening?" Miles looked back at the sealed hatch, listening to the distant pounding beneath them. "Pelican Bay didn't lose control today," he said quietly. "It never had it." 3 months later, after the wing was sealed again and every inch of the prison was resecured, a new report landed on Miles' desk. Another prisoner, across the state, was found dead in his cell. The message carved into his wall was identical to Crane's symbol. Miles closed the file slowly. "They thought he died in Pelican Bay," the narrator whispered. "They were wrong. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.